All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Top 5 Ways to Accelerate Your Customer Success Evolution. My name is Amber Thompson, and I will be your host. Your presenter today is Grant Clark, SVP of Managed Services and Revenue Lifecycle Leader at ServiceSource. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you run into any technical difficulties or if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A feature to the left of your slides. We'll try to answer your questions during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar as time allows. If you're viewing this on demand right now, you can submit your questions and we will answer them via email. So, if you have any technical difficulty, you can use the help widget at the bottom of your slides. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. And if you look to the left of your slides, we have a resource list available for you, and there are some helpful guides and workbooks included to help you get started after today's webinar. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. An on-demand version of this webinar will be available approximately one day after the webinar, and we'll send you a link to that recording. All right, and without further ado, I'd like to hand today's session off to Grant to get things started.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everybody who joined today. I'm excited to be sharing the next hour with you. Again, my name is Grant Clark. I'm Senior Vice President of Managed Services at ServiceSource and our Revenue Lifecycle Management Leader here at the company. And I know these webinars happen here and there. Hopefully, we get a lot out of today. I'll try to make it energetic and engaging as much as possible. It's a very timely topic, very passionate about it, given my background. Just as a quick backstory, I've been in the technology industry for over 15 years, and as I've gone through the different iterations of how the industry has evolved, I started, as the dot-com boom was in heavy swing, and I started in renewals back when software companies didn't really care about renewals. They were really focused on new sales growth and market acquisition. And so I got the lowly job of the single renewal guy. The joke around the office was that anyone can pretty much do renewals. You can't really mess that up. Of course, people are going to renew a product. And I was able to bring together a ragtag team of people as we started growing our department. But the challenge was that it never really was an area of investment. Most companies put more investment around marketing, investment in new sales, and renewals usually get the leftovers. At the time back then, the joke was that renewals is where inside sales reps go to die. If they can't sell, then of course they can renew. And so I got the graveyard of inside sales reps back then, and I think as most of you who joined this call are more keenly aware, that's not the case anymore. We've been able to see the industry make a significant shift in around our customer base, how important customers are, and how vital that is to a recurring revenue base for a lot of the companies that exist today. So I've certainly seen all sides of it in my career, and as the past years have afforded me the opportunity to really be a part of ServiceSource and helping our customers go through these challenges. That's what I'm here to talk about today with you. So around the acceleration specifically to customer success and the evolution behind that, I'm sure there's a lot of people who will say they're busy reacting to the problems that come up with the evolution around customer success. Maybe few of them are actually proactively driving towards an outcome. Regardless, we're going to try to cover 4 things today. How do you adapt to what's evolving around the requirements for your customers? How do you better define customer success in a business maturity model? How do you transform to a customer outcome-focused company? And how do you drive more customer revenue and profitability? So let's go back a bit just to set up the conversation as we've seen things change. It's the oldest story in the book. The world's changing, and it's changing again. You could also say a lot of books have been written about each of these different definitions of the economy over the past 100 years. You can certainly see going back to the area of the time with Henry Ford and GE, the manufacturing economy really taking the turn around the turn of the century. really building the basis of the economy in the past 100 years. And then even as you get close to the 1960s, around the concept that once you build products in a manufacturing way to get more products to market, how do you get it to the consumer faster? And we saw in the 60s the supply chain economy shift, the rise of computers, logistics, and distribution models really evolved and shaped the way our economy worked during that era. And even as recent in the 90s, the rise of information, the information economy, or you could also say the digital economy, the rise of the PC, the desktop, the way that people can access information in a new way that had never been there before. But in each of these shifts, what we realize is that there are forces at hand that move the economy in that next phase, and it's how companies decide to adapt and see those trends happening either before or as they're happening, and how quickly they can adapt. I think people take pride nowadays knowing that the speed at which change is happening is accelerating. I think people take pride in how they adapt. But I want to at least talk through three areas that we see converging right now that are really the main reasons that are causing people to make that shift. And so one of them, which I think is apparent, is big data. Big data is one of the things that I think are being talked about a lot these days. Just to put it in order of magnitude, today there are 2.5 quintillion bytes of information created every day. And I think someone's even said that in the past 2 years, we'll create more information than the history of all of mankind. So big data is growing. The challenge is, as it's part of this force, is how do companies consume and utilize that information in order to make smart decisions and influence the way that they're changing or adapting in their business. And it's a question that are on a lot of people's mind, but that's certainly one of the forces pushing inward. The second one, I'd say, and as most of you are probably well aware, is just the shift to the cloud. We see major moves in things, as standard as infrastructure moving to infrastructure as a service. Companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google really moving into that market and realizing that is the direction the market is going. I think just between those three companies, there's about $21 billion being invested, which is about 3 times more than it was 4 years ago in just infrastructure as a service, not including software as a service or anything else around that cloud-based shift. So another big pressure. And then the third one is the Internet of Things. And really the concept of a connected economy is another way to put it. This isn't just the mobile devices and computers anymore. I mean, these are cars, thermostats, appliances. I think one other stat I've heard is that by 2020, the Internet of Things, in a sense, to all the connections that are out there, will exceed the number of mobile and computer devices. So you think about how many cars are on the road by 2020 that will be connected, will far exceed what we've usually defined as a way to connect to the Internet. So all these things putting pressure are creating opportunities, or what you'd also call revenue streams. These are new revenue streams that companies need to take advantage of in order to continue to evolve and ensure that they are in the best position to move their company forward. And so what we wanted to talk about, and the way we're thinking about it, and this is relevant to the conversation we're about to have, is that the next economy at hand is the customer experience economy. And we think about the customer experience economy in a way that the customer now has the power. The empowered customer has choice. It's funny, even as we go back, a great book, I don't know if everyone's read it, it's called Megatrends by Jim Naisbitt. Back in 1982, it was one of the big megatrends. He talked about that there's going to be an increase of choice with customers. It's no longer an either or. And he was using examples like cable companies and in other ways at the time that he saw the trend going that direction. And here we are, decades later, really seeing that come to fruition. And we see it because the way companies are responding to that, in one way, is just the rise of the subscription model. Companies realize that the way a customer is choosing to consume or pay for value is different than what it used to be in the information economy. When you buy hardware, or you buy software licenses, and just to see how many companies have adapted to that subscription model and have disrupted what we've typically seen as a way to create revenue, it's a great adaptation trend behind why the customer experience economy is real and it's here. I think Gartner put out a recent quote that said the customer experience is the new competitive battlefield. So as companies are trying to invest in technologies to compete against each other, features and functionality, trying to be the latest and greatest, that may not be the only competitive differentiator anymore. I think it's the way the customer gets the experience out of the way that they interact with that provider or that vendor. That's really where the differentiation is going to show up more and more, even beyond what we see today. Punchline being that the power has certainly shifted from the seller to the buyer. And so what that means is that customers aren't necessarily buying a product like they used to. Customers are expecting to achieve an outcome. And so as we moved to selling products, we started selling services. We realized that there needed to be incremental value created around the way the customer bought a tangible piece of hardware or software. We saw that over the past decade, value-added services, whether it be tech support, a high-level tier of maintenance and releases that come through those services. But now it's relationships. The shift for the empowered customer is saying that if I'm going to go down this journey with my vendor, I'm going to buy something, I need to know that I'm going to get the right outcome out of it. And that's going to require a foundation in the relationship we have so that I know I get what I want. And when I don't get what I want, I'm going to go find a new relationship. And the challenge, that the shift I talked about on the previous slides, is that there's more choice. That customer now gets to do that more than they used to. The way for them to unplug or deinstall, and especially if you're in the cloud, so much easier now for customers to make that decision. So what companies have to ask themselves is that if that's the way customers perceive their journey when they buy that product or service, subscription, whatever it may be, do you want them to chart out that journey by themselves, or do you want to chart out that journey with them? And we've seen time and time again, when you, as a vendor, let the customer decide how that journey goes, a lot can go wrong. And it usually doesn't end well for the retention of that customer or the overall spend that happens over time. And so obstacles come up on that journey. I would say I'd rather be in a journey with a customer in an engaged way, investing in that experience, knowing that I'm going to hit obstacles, but at least I'm hitting obstacles with them. And typically what we've seen is that if someone hits an obstacle and they're by themselves as a customer, they assume they know everything, and so they say, well, I can't get past this issue, so clearly this product doesn't work, I'm going to go shop somewhere else. And there's usually three things that we have seen come up along that journey, and I'm going to hit this throughout the deck, but just to give you a preview. One is that customer outcomes always change, or I should say they usually change. Customer buys a product for a certain reason. Look, things move fast, things change. 180 days later, that outcome may have to change. Second, usage versus intent is a different way to think about what you probably read a lot about in the industry right now, which is predictive analytics and usage data, utilization data, know how your customers are consuming the product in order to predict their intent. Those are usually two different things. I'll explain that a little bit more when we get through the presentation. And the last one's the feedback loop. This is beyond just voice of the customer, another very common term you hear out in the market. Just because you get the voice of a customer doesn't tie it back to the feedback loop you need to ensure that the consumption of the value is being met. And that's something else we'll talk about. So by being in the journey, being there with the customer, knowing the customer is empowered, and knowing you're going to hit obstacles, at least you're putting yourself in the position to have a higher level of success than I think what we've seen customers not adapt be challenged with. However, there are a lot of things that, in order to pull all that off, companies have to think about 5 key areas of where they are to put themselves in a better position with their customer. Technology, data, key performance indicators, people, and process. And a company has to think about, across those 5 lenses, where do I want to go? You've got to have some sort of vision behind, just because you say I want to have better KPIs, you got to start asking yourself for what purpose? What am I trying to achieve? Where am I trying to go just by getting better KPIs? You have to assess where your current capabilities are. What state is my data in? I think data is a pretty popular topic to talk about. Everyone's got some sort of data challenge, but being able to benchmark that or understand where that is important. And then what are you going to do to transform? So say you want to transform the profile of people that you want to put towards this customer experience strategy or customer success strategy. What new profile of people do you need to put into those roles? Do you have the right descriptions of those roles? Is that going to require you to overhaul your organization, or is it just about keying in on a few people with key talent and just building off of them? Well, all these questions point to the need to really understand where your company is in that concept of business maturity. And probably a good segue here to see where this group feels they are, but let me ask you to do a quick poll and see which area of business you think you struggle with the most. I'm sure there's probably a lot that run the gamut across the group, but I'll let each of you decide here. Maybe we'll get a quick poll in the audience and see what they think. Like I said, I'd say of all the people I've come across, I think data is a hot topic, whether that is the most important based on where people are in their maturity curve. That could certainly vary, but it'd be interesting to see what everyone thinks. Okay. As everyone's click that. Yes, data. There you go. Interesting enough, no technology. KPIs and process. In KPIs, we'll get into a slide on this later, but geez, everyone can come up with their own KPI. I think people struggle with, is this the right KPI to put me in best position against my competitors, and what are my competitors using? So I'll talk about that a little bit later for sure, but it seems like data being predominant, that's probably what I would expect. So knowing that these are all questions that people are looking for an answer, there's no universal place to start, and there's no real finite destination. There's also no one-size-fits-all, or maybe another way to describe it is one solution that fits all. I think we've seen people rush towards technology being an answer, which is interesting enough. In the poll, we didn't really have that being a struggle. So where people may be going in and buying technology that helps what they think solve around this customer success challenge, whether it's buying better predictive analytics tools or new integrated CRM platforms. It's important. I'd say it's part of it, because you could also put yourself all in on technology but not have the right process or people behind the solution to balance that out. You could also say people are trying to swarm the issue. They realize they're completely understaffed. They need to get more intimate with their customers, and they swarm it with a lot of people cost. And if you don't have a good integrated platform to track all of those interactions that they're having with the customer, you're way outbalancing the rework that would have to happen if you just go in on that approach. So all of it points to the fact that there is multiple lenses to have to consider as you assess where to put that solution forward, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can go about doing that. So let's jump into the first of 5 tips here. So we'll kind of get into the bulk of the presentation. Utilizing a framework around lifecycle management certainly is where is a great place to start. It's one place to start. I think people can go about it different ways, but from our philosophy, having that lifecycle management mapped out is important, and using a maturity model to benchmark where you are at today. So what that could look like, this is something that ServiceSource has used to date, is that companies typically look at, I'll kind of jump right to the last circle there, extension. I mean, this really is the renewal event. I think people rush towards the fact that if I get 90 or 120 or 180 days in advance of my renewal event, that's really where I'm going to improve that likelihood of retention or extension. And that's true. I'd say that puts people in a better position, certainly better even from where we were a decade ago. But the challenge is that people are already making decisions on their extension well even before that. Everything I just talked about at the beginning of the presentation points to the fact that as soon as someone buys that service, product, whatever it is, they're already in their mind articulating what that business outcome is and are expecting something pretty dang quick in order to get that value back to decide if they're going to extend it. And so the philosophy around revenue lifecycle management is to say that as soon as that sale happens, that is the entry point around that lifecycle. And the lifecycle starts with onboarding and adoption. And you have to invest in the right people, process, and infrastructure around that part of the lifecycle to ensure that is being that is coming out of the gate in the right way, out of a higher likelihood of success. And then as you're continuing to talk and interact at that point with the customer in adopting that product, service, or whatever that solution is, there is natural extensions to that conversation around expansion. I think typically people have used the renewal event as a hook to get higher level of product, cross-sell, whatever contract renegotiations. I think that's all true. I think the transaction helps put a little bit of a kind of an endpoint for people, but maybe you really want to take advantage of where customers are deciding how they're going to set up that larger purchase or that extension of footprint. Tying that into the adoption conversations becomes that much more natural feeling. It's less about, hey, by the way, you're up for renewal. Hey, why don't we tack on this cross-sell product? It works, but it could work better through the life cycle approach. And I think you're going to get a higher level of health from a customer by going in that direction. And then finally, when you get to the renewal, the extension, it almost becomes a non-event. You're almost now investing throughout the life cycle, so that extension just rolls right into the next iteration of that life cycle. And the amount of lift that an organization gets by taking that shift, it reduces risk, especially when you're trying to hit certain recurring revenue targets and on-time renewal rates. There's other extensions around, if you're transacting through the partner community, creating the right type of experience with the partner group. There's a lot of other extensions to the value of the approach. Now, that may be the environment in which you grow and retain the customer. But again, going back to the question of, all right, if I do that, where am I at? How do I benchmark myself against the right type of maturity I sit in against my business? And the way we thought about it, there's 5 steps as you go through that benchmarking process, opportunistic all the way to strategic. Opportunistic being somewhat accidental, especially if you're dealing with something that's more of a mission-critical product, probably harder to unplug, less competition in your quadrant, whatever it may be. You're probably still getting a success, but you can't tie it back to anything that is influential to get there. Emerging, this is where we see people starting to actually design the process of how that engagement interaction works, whether it be workflows, process mapping, really just understanding how many touch points a customer has beyond just the sales cycle. That's one example of where we see that coming through emerging. Discipline is that, okay, so now you got a process map and it's design. Are you running it consistently? And is it a set process that we are mapping across all cross-functional roles within a company? I've been at companies where the renewal process is probably well-defined and designed, but man, it is not widely adopted or accepted within an organization. You got intra-company competition between what the ultimate goal of the customer outcome is. You've got probably lack of priorities or different sets of priorities to what needs to get done at certain times in the process. So that's a significant leap on its own to get to discipline. Optimized, this is something around, I guess, moving one layer up. If you're consistent in a well-designed or defined process, do you have the right way to track and measure those and be able to optimize against that? So if I know I'm measuring performance today with this defined KPI, and I know I'm going to consistently execute it, how do I know that what I'm going to do today is going to give me 5 more points? And that's optimized because you know that you can have that cause and effect in managing success. And then strategic, really getting to that higher level, which I think all of us wish we could get to. Now you're going beyond all those things, and now you've got visibility real time into what's happening, and you're becoming more strategic and proactive in what you need to decide to do versus just reacting when the numbers start to drop or performance starts to slip. And what we've seen as we've benchmarked this against our profile of customer base is that on average, companies increase their renewal rate by around 8 points based on each step they take up that business maturity model. So it is material in context of dollars. If you have $100 million of recurring revenue, that equates to $8 to $12 million in that reclaimed revenue opportunity each time you invest in moving up that stack. So it becomes material from what we see. Now, doing that against the business is one thing, but you got to apply that benchmark against each 5 of the lenses. You can't just do it, holistically across the company. Data has to be measured across those 5 benchmarks: KPIs, people, process. And what you'll find, which is okay, these areas may have different levels of maturity, and you may be really high on people and process, but man, you suck at data and KPIs. And at least now you know how to go invest instead of assuming that you always got to put people on it or put process experts on it. And it lets you differentiate where that investment and success factor needs to apply. Next tip, creating a customer-facing success roadmap. And going back to business outcomes, unless you have a roadmap that defines that outcome, all you're doing is assuming. Okay, and a great way that I've seen this play out many, many times is that you go through a long sales cycle with a customer. You get them to buy, and you know why they bought it, right? They need to, whatever the business outcome may be for their business, whether it's server-based or people-based, productivity-based. That's what happens at point of sale, but what typically happens as they get through implementation and beyond, things adapt. Unless you create that roadmap, you are somewhat flying blind there. And I'm not going to go through all the detail on this slide, but this is just an example. If you just take a snapshot of the first 90 days, just 90 days, not the whole life cycle, in that onboarding period, if you don't have that roadmap of what you expect needs to happen, the challenge of that business outcome starts to work against you pretty quickly. And we've got metrics to show that first 90 days of adoption there's kind of that point of no return that when it hits a certain level of low adoption, it's an exponential increase of risk of churn. And this may not be, shocking to anybody. I think everyone's going to agree that, unless you onboard someone successfully, of course, it's not going to work. I think our point of view is that unless you do that and connect it into the overall life cycle and what you're trying to achieve, and not just back out after something gets installed or gets deployed, then that's where we see things tend to fall apart. And of course, it's about speed. Are you there to get the business outcome set up because you get licenses deployed, registered, or in use fast? That's about quality. Are you investing in a team that does introductions to the people using the product or the executive sponsor and creating the right type of quality with tech support response? And are you defining value? Are you documenting the goals and staying in touch with them just in case goals change after those first 90 days in order to achieve that overall result? Tip number 3, creating a roadmap, or I should say journey map, that goes through the entire life cycle. So we just talked about the importance in the first 90 days of defining that outcome and that kind of being that initial blueprint for the roadmap. Now that you got the outcome, what next? What happens those other 270 days or whatever it may be, 280 days after the life cycle? So here, it's just a snapshot or example, but the point really being that the experience post-sale, even the experience post-onboarding, I think typically customers have assumed that it's always, it used to be provider to customer. So we do, as vendors, we do email campaigns, we do marketing blasts, we do ticklers, just something that is very one way, right? Vendor to customer. Everything I just talked about is that's shifting. It's customer to vendor now. And if you don't take the time to map out what you would consider an ideal journey for what you anticipate coming up with a customer, you're always playing reaction mode. So let me give some real examples to hopefully make sense of what I'm saying. You could probably think about any of your end users, your customers. You'll probably find that there's always a repetitive or common challenge that comes up in the use of the product or in use in their environment. You could go back to trending around tech support cases, common types of cases logged. You could look at peaks within the year. There's high seasons and low seasons. You could look at the type of customer that buys. Is this a retail customer who's using your product as part of the retail space, which certainly has high or low seasons, right? Think about Christmas and everything else. Or is this a customer maybe that's in the tax or legal sector that, once a year has a huge spike in what they deal with and how they interact with that product. And so if you map out the journey to say, knowing this is how my customer is likely going to behave based on what I know comes up as challenges, what I know they'll use the product for, what I know, tech support tells me, how would that look? And as I'm engaging the customer through the life cycle, how do I compare that against my journey? And if we see that we need to always contact that customer after 6 months because we know typically that's where adoption drops, build that into the journey map and use that as a milestone to ensure that you're achieving ahead of that actually happening. Or if we know that downtime is a big issue for a customer around the holiday season because of the servers that help them through their e-commerce site, you can get ahead of that and then map that into the journey so that you're being proactive with the customer as part of that life cycle. And the customer is going to start to see that in value, and the vendor should now be getting ahead of the issues so that it doesn't cause the likely outcome that it has in the past where they'll get sick of it and go to a competitor or whatever else it may be. So when we're talking about increasing customer health, yeah, of course, it's about usage and utilization and all those other things, but you got to map it back to something to know if they're actually taking that journey the way you anticipated or not. And maybe they go a different way, and you just update your journey maps according to what you're seeing or observing as you're interacting with the customer. Tip number 4, I talked about this earlier, big data. Big data has big impact, especially on customer experience, and especially as companies are trying to decide how to lower cost to serve. So it's probably one of my favorite topics because it gets emotional for some people, and I'd be interested to see how this group reacts to this. So I think SaaS companies are certainly at an advantage that from the very beginning deploy their subscription-based products out to market and can track the amount of usage, utilization, and consumption as best as anybody. And where software and hardware companies are right now, they're struggling because a lot of times they may not have that usage data built in. The intensity to go try to extract that data is too much for people to manage. And so there is technology out there as a way to capture that. I mean, there's certainly through the CRM side, subscription-based marketing automation, case management. There are ways from a technology platform to capture that information as the customer or the end user interacts with the vendor. Revenue analytics being a way to measure it. There's a lot of analytics tools out there from customer usage. But I know first hardware companies and software companies usually pause when this topic comes up because they're like, well, I get it, but I don't have data coming off my server to tell me exactly how that customer is consuming that piece of hardware. And so they usually try to gloss over this part when we talk about usage and utilization as a way to use big data to interpret health or to make action. What I'll say, and this is things that we've pulled together with our experience with software, hardware, healthcare, it doesn't matter what industry, you can still measure what is qualitative and quantitative in usage in kind of a concept we call TLUs, or things like usage. Big data, as I mentioned, there's so much data out there. If you can at least try to pinpoint or prioritize the things that can act as a proxy to get to a better definition of health, that's better than nothing. That's at least a way to get over the excuse that just because you're not a SaaS-based company that you can't use that exhaust data from the product. Well, even if you are a SaaS-based company, you should be able to still include these incremental to just what is being pushed out of the product, because you got to get the full picture anyway. You can read the list of these things here, but we found ways to construct a profile of a customer. One of these is actually not listed up here, but another example, do they pay on time? A happy customer should be able to pay on time. Troubled customers usually are challenged, and if that's a recurring issue that we're seeing with a customer, that's probably one of the red flags to pull into that profiling matrix. How often do they use tech support? What's interesting about that, you got to think about, okay, they use it a lot, great. That means they're accessing our service, but maybe they're using a lot because the product sucks. That's not good. So how do we find a better way to interpret the balance of that use of that TLU, so to speak, in kind of a qualitative view as well? Point being, in order to really take that big data concept and boil it down to what matters, think about usage. What does it mean for a customer to consume a product? And if you are willing to admit that defines value, then you should be able to admit that leveraging anything like a TLU or things like usage is important, no matter what hardware, software, SaaS, healthcare, whatever background industry a company is in. Rookie mistake, I'll put this out here. I think we've seen this happen, and I think just going through the learning curve has presented itself a lot. But there can be false reads if you just look at raw data alone, it's dangerous to make an interpretation or predictive analytic engine out of that. If you use data in a quantitative way to at least target, prioritize, or put kind of an initial disposition out there, I think that's fine. What still has to be complemented in the 5 things I talked about earlier is where's the people and process behind that. You may call a customer, and once you start to engage them using that raw data that tells you that they're at risk, and you talk to them and you realize they're not at risk, they're just not using the product the past 3 months because they've had a shift in their organization and they're just trying to reallocate licenses, or it's low season for them. So, or you could consider a customer to be incredibly healthy because they're using the product a lot, and you may find out, well, they're using the product because they're just trying to extract all of the data out of the system to go import it into the competitor that they just bought. So you got to complement qualitative and quantitative and not let data rule the assumption or disposition of where you think that customer is at. And it goes back to value, right? If you're complementing it with the people engagement and a lifecycle management approach, you're able to get a better handle on value over a longer period of time. Last tip, number 5, continually innovate, improve, while lowering the cost to serve and growing revenue faster. So how do you innovate and improve the process? I talked about it in the 4th or 5th slide earlier. It's the feedback loop. The feedback loop, beyond just voice of the customer, is crucial to understand that in the life cycle, people are going to encounter things at different times that have to be captured in order to pull back into the solution or delivery of that solution to ensure that that improvement or innovation is happening. I will say that, again, going back to qualitative and quantitative, it's great to get the feedback loop in customer response, but you got to measure it as well. And that kind of goes back to measuring the ROI of where you see some of the improvements that you invest in. So here's a good example, one example. We see about 15 different KPIs when you start mapping it across the entire life cycle, that if you really want to improve and innovate, you got to at least think about the things you're measuring as a way to translate that time you're putting into it into the outcome. I think everyone's got most of these, right? Retention rate, pretty common, universal. Renewal rate, as people would say. Churn rate, which is just the inverse of that. I think for the most part, people are using customer health. Adoption score, it's interesting. It can be very subjective. I think we've got a point of view on how to make it less subjective in measuring adoption. So there are ways that each of these KPIs have to be translated. And from our point of view, we can benchmark those as a way to give confidence behind the use of those KPIs, just based on our experience and the amount of customers we have and what we've seen out of this list of 15 to have the most influence. We certainly have a point of view behind that. But when you look at the breadth of what you've got to measure, you can't just say, hey, we increased our renewal rate, that's good enough. There's other metrics that have to be pulled in the maturity model to really see the outcome I think people desire. And it's also going back to the engagement piece. If you're talking about innovating and improving, that has to come by way of the engaging strategy to the customer. And you can't over-engage them, right? You can't start telemarketing them and blowing them up every 2 weeks, every 30 days, whatever it may be. I think there is a smart targeting approach that will certainly give the most bang for the buck, especially trying to lower your cost to serve in order to implement a strategy like this. Finding specific milestones or activities to trigger a play, I think is a smart way to do it. It essentially puts that pyramid view and getting ahead of a customer that probably needs that engagement more than just trying to touch every single customer in order to get the right value. And then finally, again, I'm not going to go through every bit of this slide. It's just an example for illustration, but what ServiceSource can do is even get probably a more mature model above that, is to say, okay, based on the play, are we trying to handle a customer that requires high adoption, moderate adoption, or low adoption? And you can easily say, hey, let's ignore everyone who's already got high health or good health and high adoption, and let's just go pour everything into our high-risk customers. It's a little bit of a leveraged bet because you're hoping that high adoption customer, again, data's not lying to you. So there's a specific way that you still want to engage them. You just engage them differently, opposed to probably a more intense level of engagement or smart targeting engagement when you're looking at the low adoption customers. So point of this is that in an optimized maturity level, you're being a little bit more mindful and iterative in how you go through the profile of those customers. So gone through the 5 tips. Hopefully you've been able to get some insights so far. So I'm going to turn it back over and see if there's any questions for the group. So Amber, go back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Grant. We do have a couple of questions that have come through so far, and as we're waiting for more questions to come in, I'd just like to remind everybody of a couple of things. One question that has come through a few times is, will there be a recording for this webinar available? And yes, there will be. We'll be sending a recording hopefully tomorrow, but yeah, generally a day after the webinar. So you guys can look out for that in your email inbox. And also want to remind you guys of the resources widget on the left of your slides. Grant talked a lot about customer journey mapping and kind of starting your revenue lifecycle evolution. There's a few really helpful resources in there for you. All right. And with that, let's go ahead and get started with the questions. So the first question is, which team or department is responsible for managing the revenue lifecycle?
Good question. So I think companies have different points of view, or I'm not going to give you a clear answer on what the best one is. I'll tell you what I typically see. I think when you have a very service-minded company, the revenue lifecycle management usually comes out of that service organization. So I've seen renewal teams report up into the overall managed services or tech support or professional services organization because it's that much more consultative of a required engagement. I've seen other companies that are certainly more product focused, and they roll up under the sales division. They're extension of the sales division. They're able to partner very closely with the inside or outside sales group as a way for them to engage the customer and so that they're aligned from there. I have seen it being rolled up under finance. I'll tell you, I have not seen a lot of success in that approach. I know companies try it. I think people look at recurring revenue as more of a financial mechanism than a life cycle mechanism, and so they kind of treat it almost as a kind of a collection extension. So that has not worked. I have seen it roll into there. But I'd say whether you're going under a service division or a sales division, the important thing is just roles and responsibilities, making sure that if a department is taking responsibility, that it's clear in how the handoffs and the way that the customer interacts with the company is clear. I've seen a lot of mistakes being made when an end user is getting multiple phone calls from multiple departments, and they're kind of confused on who they're supposed to talk to about what. So no matter what department you pick, just make sure you put the right roles and responsibilities out and keep that person accountable and let everyone else kind of adhere to that. It's important.
All right, thanks. The next question is, does this framework apply to most industries and verticals?
It does. I say naturally, I brought this up in the presentation, SaaS they're probably already ahead of the curve because they realize the importance of that subscription model. I think we've seen probably in the past 3 years, software companies getting it, already moving to the cloud. You know, companies like Adobe, Microsoft, a lot of other ones that just realized, like, we've got to provide a cloud solution for our customers. So the revenue lifecycle management certainly what applies in that sense. Hardware companies are coming, and I'll tell you, even the 100-year-old, you know, kind of bellwether hardware companies are seeing the need, and I've seen some start to actually create software offerings to attach or cross-sell to their existing hardware solutions in order to start gaining insight on those hardware products, kind of like bolt-on usage machines almost, you know, as a way to give back value to the customer to say, look, buying this attached software to your hardware actually is going to give you better usage and utilization, and it's going to allow us to serve you better. I've seen that start to happen. But I don't think people should opt out because they think just because I'm an asset company, hardware company, or a healthcare machine company that I can't apply lifecycle management, because, again, it's not a product, it's not the service, it's the customer. So whether a customer is buying hardware, software, SaaS, this is what they want. So I'd say everyone's going to have to get on board.
All right, and it looks like that's all the questions we have for today, Grant. With that, I want to thank everybody again for joining us for today's webinar, and well, you'll now be directed to a short four-question survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you took 2 minutes to provide your feedback for today's event so we can continue to improve your webinar experience going forward. And with that, thanks again, Grant, for joining us today, and we're looking forward to the next webinar coming up in March, and hope you guys have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.